Everyone, this is value before victory.
Here today to talk about our reactions to the ban and restricted announcement, because there's really not really that much to announce.
Yeah, no
Well,
bans outside of standard.
exactly. So we'll do the same thing as last video. We'll talk about Legacy first and then Vintage after. So for Legacy, in case you haven't seen it, the announcement is no changes. How are we feeling about no changes?
For Legacy, I don't know. After reading their article, it's just crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're talking about they don't know if Reanimator is the top deck because players want to play it or whatnot, or if it's just because it's the best deck. They say that the data doesn't point to it, which, I mean, sure, but like, I don't know. If I were to ban 3 cards from any deck in the format and it stayed the best or most played deck in the format,
Mm-hmm.
I would be very surprised because I don't think you can do that with Delver. I don't think you can do that with any other deck. So it's just wild to me. And then they're talking about the deep knowledge of playing Oops All. Nobody with Oops All spells has deep knowledge. Like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about?
I
Oops
feel
All spells is not knowledge based deck.
I feel they're conflating a little. I mean, overall, I felt very neutral about their discussion, but the point about Oops really did strike me as strange because I feel like it's a deck where you have to have a lot of like game engine knowledge to create the deck. Like building the deck is a masterpiece. Like of deck building. Like I think everyone can
Yeah,
agree on that. Like I love the deck, like the deck itself. I don't like that it's how it plays, but the fact that it's possible is like a marvel, right? But that doesn't mean that it should stay as it is. Um, for the Blue Black Reanimator, I honestly still feel like it's out of line. But since we made the last announcement, I kind of have come around to be like, maybe we should have more unbans and not that many bans. Because like banning things are very lame. And with my experience in Vintage recently, I've kind of come around to being more of like the format should be able to self-regulate, and if it doesn't have the tools to
yep.
self-regulate, we should give them those tools, right? Whether it's with new printings or with unbanning things, or just making so that there's like some sort of tension, right? So, for example, in Vintage now we have this new desert, which you can see on the screen right now, coming up, and that is putting us a severe push on, or adding more pressure to whether you want to play Lurrus in as your companion or not, and that sort of stuff, right? Versus in Legacy, there really is very little tension. You're playing Wasteland Days Brainstorm decks, and you're just choosing your flavor, whether you want Tamiyo Nethergo, if you want Entomb Atraxa, or you want DRC and Cory Steelcutter. That's basically your menu. And then anything out of that is just like force check decks in a way of like oops or omniscience or that sort of stuff, and very very fringe other things. I also felt that pointing to the showcase as the format is healthy is quite crazy. Just to be honest, it
I'd agree.
is the format where, how to say it? I feel like because the showcase attracts a lot of people that don't play the format, doing well as a format grinder is not that hard. Or it's easier than a normal challenge where everyone that's playing it, like a 45-hour player legacy challenge, has a lot of the committed players, versus showcase pulls in a lot of people that are not as good with it. So you can do well with, and also people that don't usually play, and it's just like, hey, I have these points, I want to play this, even though they know a bit of legacy. So and regardless of that, I think just one event is not, like, just because it's the largest event, it's like saying that EW was fine, even though this last EW was quite because they spiked it with the Mystic Forge deck. But just because there was one Reanimator deck, right? Because you could say the same thing, right? There was one Reanimator
Yep.
deck, a friend of ours, in top eight.
Frog is perfectly fine.
Yeah, Frog is perfectly fine because it's only done one. Shoutouts to them, by the way.
Yep.
But that's not a way to do it, right? And so well, that just irked me as wrong. I personally, I'm fine with it, honestly. I think it's fine that we talk about how the format is looking pre BNR, but now the bans are done. Also important to call out that next banning restricted announcement, they said the date is November 24th, and that is the same week as Europe Eternal Weekend. So very likely or highly likely that there are also going to be no changes. It would be insane if there were changes that applied with that short term, because people are flying with their cards the
Yeah,
days
I
before.
think they would have to say that the changes are being pushed back
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Eternal Weekend Europe. Just because imagine you show up with your deck you've been practicing for
Yeah.
months, you've watched stuff on it from America, and then nope.
Which has happened before, I believe, where there was a tournament where it was like a lame duck thing where like we knew the changes were different, but it was pushed a couple days. I
Yeah.
think that has happened. Regardless, no, this is the format that we have until EW. So at least I honestly thought that was good. Question with some some caveats, right? Because last year we had this sort of weird thing where EW was November, but the bans happened like September-ish or something like that, and it was like strange to know where the format was gonna fall. But here we do have like clear insight that this is what we have for the next 5 months or so. And so if you want to prepare and plan, other than Edge of Eternities, which we have seen very few
And
cards of
Spider-Man.
it, and Spider-Man. Other than that, this is the format that we'll have, and it is much more likely that we'll get a strategy that adapts cards from those sets rather than a big overhaul, right? Like we don't expect Edge of Eternities or Spider-Man to be Modern Horizons 4 or Triple Masters or whatever, right?
And even though we have seen some very powerful cards be leaked or shown, they don't seem to be strong enough to make their own archetypes. They seem strong enough to power existing archetypes, but I don't think at the moment, maybe Spider-Man will have something, but I don't think Edge of Eternity is going to be anything that creates a brand new archetype.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, though. We have yet to see.
Yeah, and granted, there's only been like 4 cards spoil or 5-ish, so we'll see. For now, I feel like we are pretty certain that this is what we're going to have.
Yep. And honestly, I'm disappointed that there was no unbans, but this is why pretty soon we're going to be throwing an unban tournament where we've picked. At the moment, I think we're on 13. We might do a 14th card for our unban test, but the goal is just we're going to get some people and just have a tournament where these 14 cards are unbanned. Make whatever deck you want with these cards or without. If you don't want to play with them, that's fine. And just see how the format feels, because a lot of cards on the ban list honestly seem like they'd be fine to take off or would promote new strategies that are just as strong as what we currently have. And that'd be great to have like a bunch of tier 0 strategies instead of just what feels like Reanimator and then its friends lower down.
So I've seen a lot of talk about Legacy just needing to put more Graveyard Hate in the deck. Specifically, I've seen people mentioning Grafdigger's Cage a lot. And I wanted to just talk about it a little bit. I personally don't think that the argument of you just need more Graveyard Hate makes a lot of sense to me. I've had plenty of games where I've had turn 1 Nihil Spellbomb and I've died to Upsal spells just going for it. Comes back to my usual qualm with this deck, which is that they have mid-combo protection while they're like... Comboing gives them the protection for the most part, right? To the hate. Unless you're playing main deck Grafdigger's Cage, which maybe that's where we are at this moment. Possibly, I don't know. But I feel like that would be pretty wild. I personally think that that's the problem, because it is a deck that is not as linear as other graveyard decks that just fold to some of the targeted hate. Like there are decks that just, for example, I don't know, Deafening Silence and Ruby Storm, right? That's one of that. It's like it's very, very, very difficult for that deck to come out of it. There are still ways, but it's super complicated. Versus for Reanimator and Oops, there's only so much graveyard hate that is viable, right? Because Surgical Extraction is not viable against Oops. Neither is Fairy Macabre for the most part. So you need other cards, and there's not that many. It's either Cage or it is Leyline of the Void for the majority of like non-blue decks. Mindbreak Trap for Moonstompy, that sort of stuff. So there's a handful, very small handful of cards that are actually graveyard hate in the way that it just like completely quote unquote destroys their graveyard strategy. Because let's all remember that they have multiple pivot plans that are equally as good. And if you just sideboard in 7 graveyard cards and they just drop out all of their graveyard stuff and they just pivot plan, you are playing a worse version of your deck against their deck that is still equally as powerful, right? So that is, I just don't feel the solution. You cannot disrespect the pivot and you cannot disrespect the graveyard. So there's a lot of tension in the graveyard and in the deck building. And it's possible we just need to build better decks. But if I need to hear another, we just need to put some graveyard hate cards in our sideboard argument, I am going to scream.
No, but that's just is the craziest thing because one graveyard hate. You don't ever have a graveyard hate that like draws you a card except for maybe Ground Seal, and that card's too slow.
Mm-hmm.
And like a perfect example of this is I was playing for top 8, my winning in at the RC qualifier for Legacy on MTGO versus McWinsauce, who took down the event. And there was a point where I had 2 Core Steel Cutters, a Grafdigger's Cage on board, and he had 2 Engineered Explosives in hand, of which I forced one, and both of them went on 2 because he didn't care that he couldn't reanimate his Atraxa.
Mm-hmm.
He had a Tameo out and was about to play a Murktide.
Yeah.
So all he cared about was not dying. So like I had Graveyard Hate, he had removal for it, but he chose not to remove it because that deck doesn't need the graveyard a lot of the time. A lot of the time, oh, you trap the graveyard. Well, that's a waste of a card because now here's a Murktide that's an 8/8. Good luck.
For sure. And also, let's not forget that for a while, one of the pivot plans for Oops was just like mono black aggro, where they played like Unstoppable Slasher and stuff like that. And that is still also
Barrowwave.
Barrowwave. Like there's a lot of pivot plans that are good. Right now, I suspect we are seeing a lot of the same because people are copy pasting it, not because necessarily it's like the best one. When I was grinding Black White Catchmos in Legacy, I remember there were like 3 versions of the deck, and you had to wait for the whole deck to be milled and look at the deck and say, okay, it's this version or this version, based purely on what cards, on what MDFCs they were playing, kind of, right? So that's kind of all I'll say about that thing. The one other thing is just like, we know this is the format that we have for EW, and so right now, if you're a Legacy player, you just have to consider if this is a format that you want to play, yes or no, because ultimately, this is our hobby. You are supposed to have fun with it. If you don't have fun, then just don't play it and play something else, or play with your friends and say, hey, let's just not play Entomb, whatever, right? You can, quote unquote, try to do that. But second is just like, because we know that it's until November, I would propose everyone to just, bury the hatchet and be like, okay, this is the meta I have to play, and so if I want to play AEW, I have to pick a deck and focus on that deck and practice for that. And that I feel is just more healthy than continue to complain. We complained all until the bans. The bans are here or they're not here, and so move on until the next time the BNRs are there, and let's just play the format that we have.
Yep.
Or not.
I mean, to quote Bosch and Roll from earlier today, he had a 5-0 league that he posted a video of with Oops All Spells. It went from a video that was supposed to be end of life for the deck to studying for EW. So if Oops is the choice you land on now, knowing that it's going to be there, I would suggest watching that video because it's a pretty good example of him winning through Grafdigger's Cages, Leyline of the Void, Double Forces, and more. Because the deck can do that if you get the right cards. So it's good studying, and would recommend watching that video.
Yeah, I will also actually say something about that, and Ryan will forgive me, but because he says so the same in the video. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing, so he's just like sideboarding whatever. In a way, it's like I have these things that people have in the medium. I don't know, I'll do. I think this looks good, and it just like doesn't matter, right? Which I will say is not always how Oops is gonna work, but it is very funny that he got this video out for the VNR.
Yep.
Anyway, so moving on to Vintage. Vintage has no changes. How are we feeling about no changes?
Honestly, I think it's fine. Obviously, PO is the best deck. But it's been so adapted to that it's lost down to, it was at 57, 58% when it first came out. All cylinders blazing. It was just crushing every challenge. Now it's sitting at 52%, and I think that's more than fine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any card that you really want to ban, or I guess in this case, restrict. And I get the people that wanted Stock Up restricted. It's very strong, and if it ends up getting restricted one day, would make sense, but it's also fine. And I get the people that want Lurrus banned to open up the format a bit more. But Lurrus leads to fun play patterns a lot of the time. Sometimes it's just annoying. But I think Lurrus is a healthy card for the format, and if it gets banned, that's fine, but it's going to be a really big hit on control, and we're going to have a completely different format. Like, the format will not be the same at all. I know Lurrus is only 30% of decks, maybe 40%, but because Lurrus is here, every deck has to respect that, and every deck is different than how it would be if Lurrus was not here.
I actually think that Control Lurrus is the best deck. Probably Dimir at this point, since it seems to have a favorable matchup against Esper, but it's kind of like here. They have very similar win rates and play rates and stuff, so it's kind of hard to tell. Lurrus PO has been doing pretty, like, much less than it used to be to a deck that is just good, right? And that's kind of like the thing that is good in Vintage, is that we have enough tools to self-regulate the stuff. I do like no changes. In the last week or so, I had been afraid of a Lurrus ban for some reason. A lot of people were talking about it. I just feel like if you come from Legacy, this might shock you, but Bowmasters, Frog, and Lurrus are actually the good guys in Vintage. They're just like
They are.
the ones keeping the stuff together. So, switching gears can be a little difficult for two cards that are super banned in Legacy. I also feel like Vintage is going to get a shake-up. Sort of. We'll see. With the new Tezzeret being printed in Edge of Eternities. Whether it's going to be a complete, things change massively, or it's just something that some decks are just made better by it and, life moves on. We'll see. But it's also, as Matt said, right, like from the release of Stock Up to the dominance of Lurrus PO to the meta adjusting and Lurrus PO coming back to a reasonable play pattern and like a play rate and win rate, nothing has been released or touched. Like, there's no relevant cards being added or taken away from the card pool for that change to have happened, right? So the confidence of this format being able to self-regulate, especially with so much time to go there, Two Veterans I think releases in like 3 weeks or something like that. We have like months still. Sorry, I said 3 weeks, maybe it's more. But what I mean is like we'll have months before it releases to adapt to it, right? So pretty happy with the Vintage changes. Maybe some unrestrictions were in place, but honestly, having a small ban unrestricted list in Vintage is more of a community goal that is more for the aesthetics and the cleanliness than actually something that is virtuous per se, right? Like, doesn't really matter if there are cards. Like, if they put in the banned list, let's say, I don't know, a random common from Innistrad, right? The format doesn't care. Like, does it look dirty? Sure, but like, does it matter for the format? No. And so realistically, just unrestrictions for the sake of unrestrictions when the format is going to get a pretty big punch with Tezzeret. I also talked about unrestricting Throne of Amethyst the day before they showed the Tezzeret, and I was like, nope, let's take it back. For now, I think no changes in Vintage is pretty good. I personally have been having a blast in Vintage. You might have seen a couple of videos on the channel already from us doing that. So hopefully that will continue to be the same.
Yeah. And I mean, just to add something with the new Tezzeret coming, whether it's a good card or not, I think it's going to make a splash when it comes in. And it's going to do good because people won't have the sideboards up to date with it.
Yeah.
But eventually, like, if it's good, Consign's going in the sideboard over Steel Sabotage. It'll deal with it. And there's other ways too. But you look at, like, just the history of Vintage decks from NYSE to March of this year, where PO was taking everything down. All of a sudden, we got Null Rods in the main deck from Blue, Black, and Esper. We've got slow changes. Now PO can't just go all aggro. They have to change their own deck to add Flusters in it and their own counter spells and more hate against their deck, which meant that Blue, Black, and Esper could now lessen that hate a little bit and put more of the sideboard for the rest of the meta because they weren't being crushed as much as they were from the rest of the meta because they didn't have to target PO as much because PO had to lower their amount of I guess not aggro, but like super speed pieces to include these extra pieces like Fluster. And that's how the format was able to regulate to where we are now.
Yeah.
And if Tezzeret's good, a similar thing's going to happen. We're going to have Blue Black with Consigns, Esper with Consigns, and then maybe Tezzeret goes down from a 4 of to a 2 of or something like that.
Yeah. It's also gonna be cool to see tension because a lot of the counter spell suite has moved away from Pierce to a little bit more of a fluster based thing. Mono White Initiative has adopted Void Mirror as a 4 off just to clamp that. Shops is playing more Sphere of Resistances. So there's like things are moving around. A lot of the cards that are being played right now still tag Tezzeret, specifically from Mono White Initiative. Both Clorian Conqueror and Void Mirror tag it quite well. Loros decks can't play it without making a big sacrifice. Shops, all of their cards pretty much tag it except for Twin Sphere. So we'll see how it ends up going. I feel like there's enough going on that it's gonna be a good card. It's not gonna be, or hopefully it's not gonna be a broken card. Although it might need to be restricted. We'll see. Just because a lot of the restricted artifacts at 1 or 0 now you have 4 more copies. So that's where I could see a restriction later on. For now, let's see how the format evolves, and take it there. Even if it were completely broken, I feel like we have the tools. Specifically, you mentioned a couple: Consign to Memory, a very good one, a very cheap one as well. And we have all the forces in the world. Maybe we need to split between Flusterstorm and Spell Pierce and stuff like that. So overall, optimistic about it.
Deck to watch out for, Raker Shops, as that's going to be the best deck for it, as it can help with the combo with Sensei's Divine Top and get protection. So definitely keep your eye out on Raker Shops. That's probably going to be the best deck for it.
Maybe that just brings back, I don't know, Stifle Knot a little because, what's the name? Doorkeeper Thrall just stops that deck on its tracks, just like flat out. So, and it also can just forgo Loros to play Null Drifters and also play itself Tezzeret. They play a lot of fast mana, so maybe you could just searches the Dreadnought as well. So there's a lot of decks that can make use of it. It will be cool to see where we end up in that frame. Yeah. So I think that's all we had for you. Quick and short video. Especially just take care of yourselves. There's so much hate in Legacy. I know that we all like to be salty and whiny, but take a deep breath and let's move on and try to at least enjoy EW this year.
I fully agree. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching the video, and we hope to see you guys in our next one.
Bye.